Hi, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the BLC Spring Webinar event, Worker Education and Certification, Cannabis Basics for Prospective Employees. My name is Tony Forge, and I'm going to be doing double duty tonight. I'm going to be your moderator, as well as one of your subject matter experts. So before we get into the webinar, just a couple of things I want to go over with you. This webinar is being recorded, and at a later date, you'll be able to view it on the DCR website. Also, you're not going to be able to control your camera or your audio function. That's going to be turned off for you, but don't fret. You'll be able to hear us. You'll be able to listen to us. You'll be able to see us. And if you have any comments, if you have any questions, if you want to network with other people on this webinar, be sure to use the chat function. You should also note that we're going to have a formal Q&A session, probably at the latter part of the webinar. And at that time, you can ask any questions that you would like. We are so here to answer any questions that you may have. So, a couple of additional things. The content that you see today was not created by LA County, LA City, or the DCR. It's being used for informational purposes only. You should note that the DCR does not endorse any particular product or any particular company. Any information that is used in this webinar will not supersede any Los Angeles Municipal Code and certainly is not legal advice. Once more, this webinar is for informational purposes only. If you would like to contact the DCR, you can do so during their regular business hours, Monday through Thursday, 10 a.m. through 4 p.m. And that number is area code 213-978-0738. So more about this BLC, you're probably asking, what does that stand for? That's the Business Licensing and Compliance Program that is run by the DCR. And it's great because it helps social equity applicants in two ways. Number one, to get your licenses, and number two, to give you all the tools you need to have a successful cannabis business. And what you can find there are checklists, toolkits, management lists, and you can also go to the LMS system. That stands for the Learning Management System. That is a self-directed toolkit in which you can find all types of information regarding different subject matters. And so if you've never been on the LMS system, I am going to encourage you to do so. And then the chat box, we will give you the official link or the URL. And if you've never, gotten on the system and you need a password, the temporary password is going to be in the chat system as well. If you have any problems accessing this system, you can contact the DCR by emailing them at dcr.sep@lacity.org. One more time, dcr.sap@lacity.org. So let me tell you a little bit about my co-host. My co-host is Kristen Oregani. Kristen has been in the cannabis industry for a very long time, more than 10 years. And Kristen, like myself, has a passion for social equity. Kristen and I have worked on a number of applications, and Kristen's sweet spot really is marketing and helping cannabis operators develop their vision for their businesses. She loves manufacturing, she loves cultivation, and she really has a sense of what is going to work, how to make it work, and what kind of clients that you want to attract. My name again is Tony Forge. I am a cannabis attorney and a consultant here in Los Angeles and owner of Forley Consulting. I too have an extreme passion for social equity. I'm more of your risk management type of person. I help operators from soup to nuts. I help you with business formation, contracts. That is very important. That's risk management, as well as operational skills. I am a 30-year attorney, and I worked in the private sector for small businesses and for large Fortune 500 companies. And I'm here to bring that expertise to cannabis operators in Los Angeles. So we're so excited to have you here tonight. Kristen is going to start us off with an overview of what this webinar is all about. Again, if you have any comments you want to make, use the chat.
Thank you all so much, Tony. Thank you for that introduction. And like Tony said, tonight, we're going to unpack the details of the DCR's local hiring requirements for all cannabis operators who are also social equity qualified in Los Angeles. And also then we're going to sort of take a look at what this means to you as a job seeker. We're going to understand more about what defines a transitional worker and a local worker. And we're also going to talk about how you are going to be able to self-identify and then what programs are available at the DCR for you with this qualification. So first we need to get through some definitions. Okay, transitional, local, and social equity hiring. What does it mean? It sounds way more complicated than it is. Basically, we're going to break it down. For social equity operators, a local worker is someone who at the time they start employment lives within a 3-mile radius of the business, okay? For tier 3 operators, that radius is expanded a little bit to 5 miles. Okay, so what does that mean for you? First, what is a transitional worker? A transitional worker, it's a 2-part definition. First, you need to reside in an economically disadvantaged area or extremely economically disadvantaged area. And we're going to talk more about what those mean a little bit later. And then also you need to face at least 2 of the following barriers to employment. Those are listed here: being homeless, custodial single parent, receiving public assistance, lacking a GED or high school diploma, having a criminal record or other involvement with the criminal justice system, suffering from chronic unemployment, you've recently been emancipated or ever been emancipated from the foster care system, being a veteran, or over the age of 65 and financially compromised. Okay, so keep in mind 2 parts. First, the first part of that was that you have to fall into that category by address. And the second part of that is that you have to have at least 2 of those defining characteristics. All right, moving on. What is a social equity worker? Okay, that is someone who's already been qualified as a social equity individual applicant, either a tier 1 or a tier 2 individual applicant who's already been qualified. We have right here, as you'll see, you can go back through this and click right into the specific criteria, but we have it listed here. What qualifies somebody as a social equity applicant? Okay, so a social equity worker is a previously qualified social equity applicant, either tier 1 or tier 2. All right, let's get into the program basics. The DCR has a good faith hiring requirement that requires all of those social equity operators from tier 1 and tier 2 who have businesses that are operating. All right, so they're already in operation. Those businesses need to have no less than 50% of their weekly hours made up of those local workers. Okay, so all social equity operators need to have 50% of their workforce made up of local workers. Of that 50%, so here's 50% of that 50%, 20% of those will be social equity workers, and 10% will be transitional workers. Now I go back to those definitions we had before. That means that if you are social equity qualified, you have the opportunity to fill 2 requirements for those operators. 1, you're already local, and then 2, if you're social equity qualified, you fulfill 2 requirements for them. Also, if you are, whatever businesses you're local to, and we'll get to how you decide that in a minute, whatever businesses you're local to, if you are also qualified as a transitional worker, then you fulfill that 10% requirement that they have. Now for tier 3 operators, that again, that expanded radius, they have a 5-mile radius for what defines a local worker. And instead of 20% of their social equity workers, they have 30% will be social equity workers. So that's an even larger opportunity for already qualified social equity applicants who may not have a business, who want to get into the industry. These are employment opportunities that exist for them that are specific to being qualified as social equity. But also, if you qualify as transitional, then you have that opportunity as well. And that all has to happen for each of these businesses. So it's a really important opportunity for people who may not understand that they fulfill a need for these businesses. The businesses have to have these folks in the building. So if you can show up for that, you're going to have a really good shot of getting a position because you fulfill their hiring requirements. Now, let's move on and break it down a little bit more. Okay, here we're going to go through it one more time. The DCR has 50% of their workforce made up of local workers. For social equity applicants, this is defined as residing within a 3-mile radius of the business premise at the time of employment. So it's not go find a business and then move close. That's not going to work. You have to actually you live there, use your address. But there are a lot of operators in Los Angeles. So it's a very good chance that regardless of where you live, you're going to be local to some businesses. And that's defined as that 3-mile radius. Okay, for tier 3 operators, same thing, 50% of their workforce is made up of local workers, but for them, that radius is expanded a little bit to a 5-mile radius to provide a little wider breadth of opportunity. Okay, now for all that, each of those 50% requirements, 10% of that local workforce has to be made up of transitional workers. Let's get into that, break it down. The rules for qualifying. You must live in an economically disadvantaged or extremely economically disadvantaged area that's defined specifically to your address, and then face at least 2 of those barriers to employment that we talked about before. So it's a 2-step process. First, it's your address. And then second, it goes through what barriers you're facing to employment. And this is not stuff to shy away from at all. If you face these barriers, then this is a way that you can find an entrance into the industry, whether you in the long term want to be an entrepreneur, or in the long term you want to be an employee, or in the long term you want to be a specialist in some area. This is a way that even with some stuff that's been preventing you from getting employment, this is stuff where you can own it and actually fulfill a hiring requirement for those local businesses. Okay, so I do have to sort of put a little bit of a disclaimer on this slide. These definitions are changing slightly. They're in the process of sort of redefining this a little bit. And when we get to the part where you're self-identifying, those tools will be identifying more specifically to how this has been changing in the current context. But essentially, these are the 2 definitions for what an economically disadvantaged area and an extremely economically disadvantaged area are. Now, the part that's in contention is that we're going to change the definition slightly, but not the definition outside of the zip code. It might not in the long term just be about zip code. It's going to change a little bit, but that is neither here nor there for you, because what you need to be concerned about is what your address is. When you're able to use our qualifying tool, it's going to show you specifically from your address, not necessarily just your zip code, but your address, all of the businesses that you would qualify under this part 1 of being a transitional worker. Okay, now social equity hiring requirements. So remember, We've got 50% of our workforce is local workers. 10% of that for everybody is transitional workers. For the social equity folks, along with that 10% requirement for transitional workers, 20% of their local workforce has to be made up of qualified social equity applicants. So what that means is if you don't have an operation, you're able to get into the industry. You're able to get an entrance again, whether you want to be an entrepreneur in the long term or you just want to be somebody who gets a position. Because you're already qualified for social equity, you fulfill that requirement for them, and that's a huge opportunity. Now moving on to tier 3, even larger opportunity, because 30% of their local workforce has to be made up of qualified social equity applicants. So if 30% of their local workforce is social equity and 10% is transitional, that's a huge amount of the workforce hours that are happening in their building that you may have an opportunity to apply for and qualify for. Okay, so here's what's coming up. That right now we're working with the DCR and we're creating a self-identification tool that's really going to help people dig into how they qualify both as transitional and as local. So essentially there'll be 2 tools that you're able to use. One is going to use your address to give you a radius map of all the businesses you qualify as local to. And the second tool will go through that process of whether or not you qualify as living in a disadvantaged or extremely disadvantaged area. And then 2, selecting that by self-identification, those barriers that you might face to understand if you qualify for that 10% transitional hiring requirement, along with also possibly qualifying as a social equity applicant. So I know that was a lot, guys, but here we're going to kind of turn it back over to Tony to talk to you about the licensed business types and the jobs that they can provide.
I think a lot of times people don't understand that there are a lot of jobs available in this industry. And what we're trying to do here today is giving you an opportunity to kind of think about, wow, I didn't know that was available under that particular license type. So we're going to review license types and some jobs that you didn't know were available that are available, and the positions that could be available. And we're going to start with retail. Everybody knows retail. Everybody knows that brick and mortar dispensary. And there's 2 types of retail licenses. There's the storefront and the non-storefront. And a dispensary can have both. They can have consumers come to the dispensary. And for non-storefront delivery, that means a consumer cannot come. That means the delivery must be made to the consumer. And so the brick and mortar is an opportunity for individuals who really don't know that much about cannabis, but know a lot about sales or retail to get into the industry. Next slide. Let's look at some of those positions. Number 1 is the general manager. I always call this the captain of the ship. This is the individual who's really going to implement the vision of the owner operator. This is the person who is going to maybe negotiate contracts with vendors. This is the person that's going to have displays. If you've ever been to a dispensary, there is sometimes displays that showcase different products. This is the individual who is going to work with the assistant manager in order to figure out, how do we get metrics up? That's track and trace. How do we get our team, queued up so they're really looking at the customer and really satisfying the needs of the customer? As you can see, they're responsible for hiring and firing, oversight of staff, inventories, branding, all of that. They are the captain. And now we have the assistant manager. That's the person that's going to help the general manager with the vision. That person also can do metrics, but they're going to be the individual who really deals with the staff. If there's a problem with the staff, it's typically going to be escalated to the assistant manager. The assistant manager is going to deal with any product issues, remediation, clients that don't like what they have received or there's a problem with the product, they're going to be helped by the assistant manager. The bud tender is really the customer experience person. This is the individual who's going to listen to the customer, who's going to figure out what those customer needs are, and therefore they're going to refer to the customer some particular product. So that means the bud tender has to know the product that is in the dispensary or store. They have to understand strains. They have to understand what typically is used for medicinal purposes, what is used for adult use purposes. And this is the person that truly interacts and creates that customer experience. The receptionist is the person that you're going to meet when you first go into a dispensary. That's the person that's going to look at your ID and can tell you 18 and older, you're medicinal, 21 and older, adult use. And in COVID, we've been seeing that the receptionist has been looking to see if you have your vaccination cards and all of the such, wearing your mask. But that person is also going to control the flow of the dispensary. They want to make sure that there's not too many people in the back. The bud tenders are trying to make sure that that customer experience is good, and so they don't want a large number of people back there. And the receptionist truly does the ebb and flow of that. Now we're talking about delivery. And delivery, non-storefront, it's a different experience. And so a transportation manager is one job that's available. And this is a person that oversees the drivers, the logistics, coordinates all of that, make sure the cars are together, everything is in compliance and the such. You can have the actual driver. That is the individual who's going to drive the product to the consumer. The logistics coordinator wants to make sure that I have the right product, the right amount, the right address, the right driver. And then sometimes, is that driver going to be there in a couple of minutes, an hour, kind of like your Uber tracking map. So you can see, depending on if you're in the store or you're a non-storefront, there are a lot of different opportunities for you. Next slide. Kristen is going to talk now about cultivation and what positions are in the nursery realm and also with cultivation.
Thanks, Tony. Yep, I love cultivation and my unsung hero, the nursery. So, you know, in California, there are two types of cultivation licenses. There's cultivation licenses where you're going to grow the whole plant, and there's a cultivation license where you're just going to make clones. So a cultivation, you know, you're growing female cannabis plants to maturity, and then the object is to harvest the buds from the plant for sale, or to harvest, you know, the buds, the trim, and everything else to be processed. Now, a nursery is a grow operation that only produces clones. So you're not ever going to grow the large scale plants. So in these two environments, there's a huge opportunity for both entry level and specialized positions that could be available under these hiring requirements. So let's go to let's talk about some of those. So really important is a master cultivator. If you're somebody who already has a lot of experience with a cannabis plant, you come from a family of people who have been in the industry or know, you have this knowledge already, you might be able to come into a cultivation as a master cultivator. This is somebody who, like Tony talked about with the general manager, this is somebody that really implements or is even sometimes the owner of the facility, because they have a way that they want things done. They have a growing style, as we talk about, and they really want somebody who can manage and lead a staff. And when I say a staff, I mean a staff of growers, assistants, quality control, everybody that's transporting inside, and everybody really engaged in the growing, care, and maintenance of all of the products that you're growing inside the building or in any sort of situation. The master cultivator is going to monitor the whole process. They're going to really be responsible for the finished product. Whatever comes out of the cultivation it ultimately stops with them. Right underneath the master cultivator, you're going to have a staff of growers. And these people are going to specialize sometimes in one particular part of the process. From clone to harvest, you're going to have folks that are in this sort of category. They know the product really well. They've been growing the product for some time. They've been working for the cultivation for some time. And they understand either one specific specialty from the clone to the harvest process, or they have some overall knowledge that allows them to work in a lot of those areas. The assistant grower, this is a great place for people who have a little bit of knowledge of the crop, but they don't necessarily feel as confident as somebody that would be considered a specialist. So a lot of times they're going to be the person who's responsible for bucking the plants, which is getting them ready for harvest, transporting them from room to room, doing a lot of cleaning, creating reports, and reporting to the head growers and master cultivators. One that's really important on the nursery side is a clone tech. And this is something that's really great for people who are coming into the industry because it's something that you can be taught really, really well. Let's go to the next slide. All right, here we're going to talk about processing. So a trim and harvest manager is somebody who's focused on the overall management of the plants once it's been taken down, once it's been harvested out of the grow room. The trim and harvest manager is somebody who oversees the rest of the process. And we say all the time, it doesn't matter how well you grow a cannabis plant. This portion, the processing of that plant, is where things can go from being a beautiful product to something that's unsaleable if it's done improperly. There's three kind of parts of this. There's the trimmers, who are either responsible for physically trimming the plants entirely, or after a plant has gone through a trim machine, they're going to be finishing that product before it can go out the door. So there's either hand trimming or then there's finish trimming. And then the packagers would be the people that would take that processed product, that finished product, and get it ready for, for its final sale, for how it's going to be in its final, route out of the building to a distributor. So this is a place where people can really, again, make an entry into the industry. Trimming is something that you can learn very quickly. And that is a huge opportunity for folks to get into the industry, as is packaging. This is a way that, again, even if your end goal is as an entrepreneur, this is a way you can get in and start to learn about the industry from the inside out. Okay, so now Tony's going to talk to us about what happens after. Like I said, the product is ready, it's about to go out the door, and here it goes to distribution and transportation.
So I believe distribution is the linchpin of the entire cannabis ecosystem. And there's a lot of different jobs depending on what type of distribution license that you have. And so I always say it's kind of two categories. Distribution can be transportation only, and then everything else, because people have to remember the distributor is collecting tax money from the cultivator. They are in charge sometimes of batch testing. They're going to send that off to the testing unit to make sure that it meets all of the state qualifications. They also are going to be in charge of remediation, packaging. We see in the industry white label agreements, and that means that you're going to use a distributor and you're going to slap on your brand and you're going to sell it, and then the retailers are getting their product from the distributors. And so we need to really kind of look at two different types of scenarios. So let's talk about just in the realm of distribution, and not just distribution, transportation only. And when I was talking about collecting taxes and this such, you're going to need an accountant. You're going to need a bookkeeper. You're going to need somebody who can have all that information, collect that data, make sure that the balance sheets, everything works out. And so if you have an accounting background or a bookkeeping background, you might not have thought of distribution being for you, but it really is. So that's something that I would encourage you to look at. Transportation manager, again, we talked about that. If we're looking again at transport only in that distribution chain, that person is going to be responsible to make sure that the drivers are sending product, collecting product from cultivators, sending it out to retailers, all of that. And it also could be that individual who is taking the testing, batch testing to the testing center. And you can have people that are coordinating the testing. So we're seeing here just drivers, logistical coordinators, individuals who help with that. But I want you to think of other things. So let's just think of the facility itself. I have a client who's a distributor and he has a person that is really just cleaning the operation. He wants to make sure that his distribution center looks meticulous. And he also has a facility coordinator. That's not on the slide, but it's absolutely out there. And that facility coordinator just makes sure that everything is running. And so if the transportation manager needs something, if the driver needs something, if the logistic coordinator needs something, that overall facility coordinator is helping them. Next slide.
All right, now we get to talk about one of my favorite things, manufacturing. This covers a lot of what happens to the plant after it leaves the cultivation. So manufacturing in the California cannabis industry allows operators to take the beautiful plant and turn it into some more even beautiful products. These products could be edibles, topicals, these can be resins, these can be wax, shatters, live resins, all kinds of exciting things. From a license standpoint, there's licenses where a solvent is used and licenses where one is not. There's volatile extraction, that's where we use a solvent. There's non-volatile, that's where we use a CO2 or freezing and pressing techniques. Why is this important? Well, when it comes to jobs, if you think about across those things, there's a massive number of jobs that are available for lots of different kinds of skill sets. Along with those sort of very, very straightforward manufacturing license types, there's ones that are called a shared use facility, infusion, which is, infusing edibles, and then again, packaging and labeling. So that's another opportunity for folks to find some really specific jobs in the industry. And let's look at what some of those are. All right, so specific to manufacturing, you're going to find things related to laboratories. Why? Well, because a lot of what happens in manufacturing involves the same kind of techniques that you would find in a pharmaceutical lab, for example. So if you have a background in any kind of technical lab related experiences, and you're just someone who's really analytical, this might be the place for you, is in manufacturing. So some of the higher end jobs, the lab director, that's somebody who, like our general manager, like our master grower, this is the person who's really responsible for implementing the vision of the owners. But in this case, they've got some very heavy responsibilities around safety, around quality assurance, around preventative maintenance. And really, they're going to oversee the calibration and instrumentation, really kind of like understand the overall vision of what the lab is going to create. Now, the technician, again, is going to be somebody like our specialists over in the grow who has some kind of specialized skill set. And they're going to probably do one thing over and over a lot of times during the day. They're also usually very heavily involved in preparation of the cannabis that's going to go out for testing. They're going to help with lab duties that, as directed. But But again, this is a place where if you have experience in a lot of areas, you're going to find a place in here. So if you're somebody who's very orderly, very logical, very technical by nature, you may be able to get into the manufacturing side of this. Let's keep going and look at a few more. So let's get down into some of what those specialized jobs might be. A concentrates processor is somebody who's responsible for turning those extracted cannabis into all of those specific products that we were talking about, the wax, the shatter. An extractor is actually someone who operates the very specialized machinery that goes along with those processes. And so along with those folks usually have assistants. And this is another great place to get into the industry. Again, whether you are looking for in the long term to be an entrepreneur, or you're looking just for an entry for finding employment and then moving up through a company, the extraction and processing assistance is a great way to do that, because you're going to start with some very simple, cleaning and management, a lot of sterilization, but it's stuff that anybody can really do. And so, these parts of the industry, manufacturing and cultivation, tend to be spots where people are a little more timid. They think that there's no way you can get into it without already having, really, really specialized skills. And that's really just not true. There's a wide variety of jobs and a wide variety of existing skill sets that one can start with and get into these places. And then what normally happens, particularly with manufacturing, is that as you're there for a while, you're going to start to get taught more and more about how things work in that specific lab. You're going to find ways to sort of expand your skill set from within. It's really, really focused in a lot of cases on the job training, because these are very specific machines. They're very specific processes and very specific outcomes with the product that you're trying to achieve. Let's go ahead and check out the next slide. And this is where when I say we're trying to achieve something very, very specific, that's where we get to our quality assurance officer. This is a great job for somebody who loves tracking, who loves managing, the overall quality of an environment. And this is actually where, I really found my legs in manufacturing, because I'm really good at standard operating procedures. I'm really good at identifying processes and making sure they're running smoothly. And so it's a huge opportunity for folks who may not necessarily have, the desire to be doing something extremely technical, but enjoy a technical environment, enjoy that kind of like technical oversight as a job. And it's an opportunity to really, really be in the thick of the manufacturing process without necessarily operating the machinery yourself. Another huge position is one that Tony mentioned on the other side with the distribution, both the facility manager and the maintenance manager. Those are folks that are maintaining, in some cases, the machines, which is really important, and then also the overall facility. And so, again, these are not jobs that are inaccessible to folks. It is not true that there aren't ways into the industry for folks who are coming out of positions like being someone who's been in cleaning. That's incredibly valuable in our industry. And it doesn't take knowing how to make a final end butane processed shatter in order to get into the industry. It's just simply not like that. Now, an infusion formulator, this is my other favorite job. This is the other thing that I was able to do. These are the people that make edibles and topicals. And so basically, if your background is in food service, this is where you could shine. If you have a background as a chef, this is where you can shine, because this is a huge opportunity to be formulating products that are both health and beauty, health and wellness, and those that are actually going to be infused as edibles, things that people are eating. Okay, so next slide, please. Now we're going to talk about micro business.
So with micro business, we've all heard the term vertical integration, and this is where the operator controls the supply chain, correct, of the entire business. So typically an operator will have 3 of the 4 license types. So they could have retail, distribution, cultivation, or manufacturing. So all of the jobs that we talked about before can be applicable to a micro business license, but you're going to think on a small scale. This is where I always say micro business is like the Etsy of cannabis or the craft beer of cannabis. And so typically you're going to work with an operator who really does have that vision. And so it's a more intimate environment. And so the previous jobs we were discussing before, they could be with a small operation, a large operation, but typically with micro business, you're working side by side with the owner operator. You're working side by side with the cultivator, because that cultivator may switch over and be a manufacturer. So all of the jobs we talked about before, facility manager will be applicable here. Assistant will be applicable here. Cleaning will be applicable. Trimmer, grower, everything we talked about definitely could apply in a micro business license. And then there's certain jobs that really encompass all licenses. And the first is a compliance officer. The compliance officer wants to make sure that the cannabis operator is working within the rules and the regulations. They do a lot of audits. They make sure that everybody is doing what they're supposed to do by the LA regulations as well as the state regulations. And then we know every business needs security. And so it's not only physical security you should be thinking about, but think about it. Every cannabis business needs cameras. They need a safe or a vault. And so if you're a person who really has worked in security before, just for a venue, and you know about camera placement, this could be the area for you. You can assist the cannabis business with how to place their cameras. If you know locks, if you know how to do touch technology and retina scanning in order to open locks and the such and vaults, this could be your place. We have seen so many people in security who have a background in venue security go all the way to cannabis security, in which they shine. And this is a good entry point for people who just want to do physical security at a cultivation site, at a dispensary, and the such. So all of those people that Kristen was talking about that don't have maybe a formal skill set, but they have a background in security doing it somewhere else, surely can switch over to cannabis. So that's no problem whatsoever. And then I want you to think of what I mentioned before. If you're an assistant, this is the place for you. There's always a need for an assistant. Social media plays such a big part in marketing now. If you know how to do TikTok, if you know how to do IG lives, if you know how to do all of that, you are going to be in the cannabis industry and they need you. Marketing, branding, graphics. I have my ex-partner left 4-Leaf Consulting to do boxes and graphic work. So the arts really do play a part as well. Next slide. So I hope that this webinar opened your mind up to the possibilities. And that's what we wanted to achieve here today. That there's a lot of jobs depending on the different license types, that you don't need necessarily this formal education, that you don't need a bunch of background in cannabis, that if you plant tomatoes, maybe you know how to go in to be a trimmer. If you know how to do, like I said, social media, maybe you can go and work for a cannabis company. But we want you to know that the opportunities are there. You just have to seek them. We are going to show you more operators and more opportunities at our March 19th job fair, tentatively scheduled at Los Angeles Trade Tech College. We're hoping COVID is cool and the numbers are cool so we can do it there, but we'll give you further information on that. So if you have any questions, if you have any comments, please let us know and we'll be happy to address those.
So Tony, let's start out with some questions. What do you got for me?
I got some questions for you, you know I always do. So I always get this question, Kristen, what do you think is the easiest point of entry into the cannabis industry? I'm going to start off because I think I asked you the question, then I interjected. I really think it's two ways. For me, I see it with security, and I also see it with retail. I had a really good friend that wanted to get into the cannabis industry, and she worked at Ulta. And she was, how can I relay that experience at Ulta to the cannabis industry? I said, you're selling widgets. The widget could be a gummy, the widget could be, Benefit mascara, but 100%. A widget it still is. And it still is the same skill set. It's helping a client, listening to the client's needs, listening to what the client is trying to achieve. In cannabis, am I trying to achieve relaxation? Am I dealing with anxiety? Do I need something to lift me up and up me, maybe a little hyper, or just like, do I need my brows done? So it's that same skill set of listening, selling, giving suggestions, doing promotions. And so I think that's easy. We all have some type of retail experience. And there's no difference, like I said, from selling a mascara to selling a gummy.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that retail is one of the number one entry points, particularly the bud tender position. This is something that's really easy to get into because you can usually find a part-time schedule. So there's something where you can work around even existing positions. In a lot of cases, there's a lot of weekend work. I would say, the thing to keep in mind, be prepared to work the weekends, to work the holidays, because that's when retail cannabis is open. You're not going to get Labor Day weekend off. Okay. You're going to be working a lot of those times when high retail is in effect. And for cannabis, that's the time. I mean, it's not Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. when you're going to be fully staffed, right? So you have to keep in mind, if you're going in at that entry point, you might want to expect some nights and some weekends, but that might be great for a lot of people. For me, that was exactly how I got interested in it and into it in the first place. I was working around my kids' school schedule. So I took a position as a bud tender where I did Tuesday nights and Saturday mornings because nobody wanted those two shifts. And that was my first entry point. It happened to be in Colorado, a place where we also had an attached grow. So sort of, I worked at a micro business before micro business was a thing, because in Colorado, everybody had to grow along with sell. That was just the way the regulations worked. So we had this tiny little grow. So I was able to move my way from a bud tender up the chain in the retail over then onto the cultivation side. And so I'd like to add to, yes, bud tenders, absolutely security, those front desk positions, those are great. But then on the cultivation side, I would say trimming is a huge opportunity to get into that side of it. If you love horticulture, but you just don't know how to get into the industry, there are a lot of opportunities in trimming. This again is something where, sometimes it's contract work. You don't have to work all the time. You can work a lot or work a little. You can end up working at a trim company that is an outside company that is contracted into the grow environments, or you can be contracted specifically by the growers themselves. And so this is a way to kind of get into the back of house, as we would call it, right? We've got our front of house folks, we've got our bud tenders, our general managers, all those guys. And then what I would also say is that, you know, delivery drivers is a really good spot for people who don't necessarily come into it with a lot of industry experience. That's a great way to, you know, if you're somebody who's been working for Uber and wants to change, this is very similar. Instead of driving people, you're going to drive packages. And also, if you have a background in security, delivery driving is another place where you would be highly valuable. So that's something where, you know, sometimes there's even a combined skill set where you already understand, you know, how to keep things secure, or that security mentality. That's something that's really good for delivery drivers. But there again, you're gonna work weekends, you're gonna work evenings, you're gonna work those times because that's when people are home, right? It's not gonna be Wednesday at 2 p.m. where there's gonna be an excessive amount of delivery driving. So, you know, I would say that's another one of those great entry points as well.
And you know what's so amazing? I have an operator in LA who did her regular 9 to 5 job, but was a delivery driver on the weekends because she wanted to get that knowledge before she got her operation up. She wanted real life example of how does this actually work? Now I'm going to own my retail business, but how does this actually work? Okay, so Kristen, I got one question from an attendee who is interested in learning more about propagation and meeting people in the nursery space. We only have
my favorite. Yes.
Right. We only have 3 minutes though, Kristen, 3 minutes.
Okay. So here's what you do. You find anywhere in Southern California where there's a nursery, you contact the folks at that, you look for when they have clone tech positions. What you're looking for is clone tech 1 or entry-level cloning positions where they're going to teach you one meticulous propagation technique and how to take those clones off of the mother plant and get them potted into their own soil. So I would suggest reaching out directly to those nursery businesses. And a lot of those folks are going to be available online where some others won't, because they have to make themselves known because they have to sell to all the other businesses.
And I see, can we get both your emails? Yes. You can contact me at Tony, Toni, at 4leaf Consulting, all one word.com. Again, that's Tony at 4leafconsulting.com. Kristen?
And I'm Kay Arigoni, KARIGONI at gmail.com.
Thank you. It was such a great night. Again, we urge you to go to the DCR website for more information about the BLC program. If you have any questions or comments, again, look in the chat box. We have that information for you about how to contact the DCR, and we look forward to seeing you again. Remember, check our chat because we do have information about upcoming webinars sponsored by Waco and the DCR. Take good care, everybody.
Thank you.